taking some risks. So I would think about having that division. I think people need to confront candidly. Being successful academically may make them more conservative because they've been, golden students. Their parents love them. All their parents' friends say you're great. Okay, get on with life.
So for upper level courses, if the idea is to acquire a great diversity of skill sets instead of a great diversity of knowledge base, what areas of law do you think, in combination, give a very diverse set of skills that wouldn't be found in any one area of law?
What kind of legal skills, or what kind of, I've tried to indicate that sort of, I think having an appreciation of how business people look at problems, how high governmental decision makers look at problems. It's more that different set of perspectives, and then to the extent that you have particular interests, all the academic disciplines, you mix and match. I can't answer the question because it depends on what your interests are. I just am saying that still the fundamental emphasis in law school on case-based training and reasoning from cases we have to break that. It's being done. I don't want to make it sound like the school's monolithic, but we just have to bust it open more than we have. It's hard. It's really hard to answer. I'm okay. I can keep going as long as they want. Okay. Yeah. If there are more, I'm happy to keep going for a few minutes. Yeah.
Well, it seemed to me that your statement that we need to create more law students who are leaders is akin to saying that we need to make more law students who are Olympic athletes, because being a leader is to some extent God's gift. You cannot, teach everyone to be a leader, and especially considering the selection process into law school, it's very unlikely that people with leadership qualities would make it to a law school, because you do not become a leader by reading books and staying all your life in the library. It just doesn't happen.
I agree with you, and all I'm saying is that law students ought to aspire to lead. That the prevailing legal culture is to say what's legal or not legal, and maybe to counsel. The prevailing legal culture is not to train, as the business schools and the public policy do, to train people to aspire, not to become, to aspire to leadership, and to give them the skills and the breadth of vision so that they can be leaders. No, there's of course no guarantee, but aspiring to it, putting yourself in positions, having different career moves, creates the possibility. You all, and it's impossible for you to believe, but you're all going to become my age, and and at some point. And my generation, for better, for worse, we led the world for a while, and then we move on. And in 30 years, you'll be leading the world. So, and there's no reason why the people sitting in this room shouldn't be those leaders. There's just the inevitable march of generations. So all I'm suggesting is aspire, when that time comes, to be there and have the breadth of vision to have the possibility. But I agree with you, it's not, no way it's a guarantee.
Thank you.
Okay.
Lazarus, my computer had gone into sleep mode. That's why we couldn't get anything up and running.
So that's why I have to do like a more formal.
Yeah, this is
They can see us, the speakers, today, but
mine's
go on and you can watch the webcast. My intro will be on it, but not going to be on the slide.
well, like I said, I keep my file as small as possible. So if you've got, it's still going to be okay when you put that big light through it. Mine is for as low as like 17 gigabytes. I mean, KB. So I need them not to last on my life.
You know we just lost video on your end. There you go.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to the annual webcast of the J. Reuben Clark Law Society, Providing Hope Through Service, featuring John and Becky Douglas. My name is Andy West, and I'm the president of the Duke Law Chapter of the J. Reuben Clark Law Society. And for those of you joining us who are unfamiliar with the organization, the Clark Society is a society of legal professionals who subscribe to the following mission statement. We affirm the strength brought to the law by a lawyer's personal religious conviction. We strive through public service and professional excellence to promote fairness and virtue founded upon the rule of law. We've asked our speakers today to share their experiences with the public service part of that mission statement. Before introducing the Douglases, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Deb Kinney at Duke Law School and Brian Miniter at Paul Hastings in Atlanta for all their work in making this webcast possible. And I'd also like to publicly thank the Duke Bar Association for providing the funding for the food for the event here at Duke. Now on to our introductions. Becky Douglas is the mother of 9 children, which I'm told eclipses all of her other accomplishments. In 2000, following the death of her eldest daughter, she embarked on a crusade halfway around the world to try to eradicate the devastating effects of a disease most of us thought was merely a biblical curse, long since eradicated through modern medicine. Unfortunately, millions of lives are affected by this disease. People with leprosy not only suffer terrible disfigurement, but are also terribly disadvantaged in countless other ways, denied decent medical care, housing, education, and economic opportunities. Through Rising Star Outreach, formed in 2001, Becky has touched thousands of lives by helping to establish children's hostels and providing medical care, educational opportunities, and micro-lending. Her work in India has recently been featured on an hour-long documentary broadcast on PBS entitled Breaking the Curse. More information about Rising Star is available at risingstaroutreach.org. John Douglas, our other speaker, heads the global bank regulatory practice at Paul Hastings and has practiced banking law for over 30 years. His practice involves advising large financial institutions in complex transactional matters, regulatory concerns, and enforcement issues. He served as general counsel of the FDIC in the late 1980s, during the time of the banking and thrift crisis in the United States. As such, he was involved in over 1,000 bank and thrift failures and supervised over 500 attorneys with a legal division budget of over $600 million. John is also on the board of directors of the Financial Services Volunteer Corps, a nonprofit organization formed in 1991 to assist the former Soviet states of Eastern Europe develop sound banking and financial market systems. It was created at the request of President George Bush to tap the expertise of the U.S. financial markets by having experienced lawyers, bankers, regulators, and accountants volunteer their time and expertise to strengthen the economies of these countries. Since that time, the group has sent thousands of volunteers into over 40 countries with donated services valued in excess of $100 million. More information is available at fsvc.org. The Douglases are speaking to us live from the offices of Paul Hastings in Atlanta. So without further ado, I present to you John and Becky Douglas.
Thank you. I think I'd like to start by saying what a pleasure and an honor it is for me to be here and to be a part of this. I'm a little bit like a fish out of water because I'm not an attorney, but I do appreciate this opportunity. My daughter Diana and I, when she was in college, took a wheelchair into India one day. At one point, when we got to the colony that I had been saving it for, we first were seen by a couple who recognized us because they saw our Jeep, recognized the Jeep, came running to greet us. And the thing was that they didn't really have limbs, they mostly had stumps. So they were running on all fours, kind of like, little animals. Their stumps weren't even. The woman's arm had been amputated, her one arm at the shoulder, the other one below the elbow. And so they were just kind of discombobulated. Their leg stumps were longer than their arm stumps, and so their faces were literally in the dirt. And they were trying to hold their mouths out of the dirt while they called welcome to us and then back to the colony, saying, they're here, they're here. The man, Krishna, he had a stump that had not healed yet because he had had an amputation and he was leaving a bloody trail in the dirt. It honestly was just kind of a gut-wrenching sight. My daughter Diana was totally unprepared for this. She was standing next to me. She grabbed me with her hand on my arm and kind of dug her nails into my arm, and she said, "Oh, Mom, I am so glad you brought that wheelchair." She'd given me kind of a lot of grief as we'd gone across country or across the world because I had to sort of pretend like I needed that chair in order to get it on the plane without a fee. And she was mortified and had teased me all across the world that I was being ridiculous. But once she saw the people, she just said, "Oh, so glad you brought that chair." The thing was, they were really glad to get that chair in the colony because this particular colony, the Moot colony, is just in the middle of nowhere. It's totally isolated, and they had not been able to ever get to any medical care. So we had been told that when they needed an amputation, they had to actually cut off their own limbs. But now that they had the chair, they would be able to put the person needing an amputation into the chair and then push them the many miles to the leprosy hospital, get an amputation, and then push them back. And they wouldn't be so traumatized by having to cut off their own limbs. I've thought about that a lot because it was just one chair, one thing. But this one thing totally changed the standard of living for a whole colony of leprosy-affected people. It seems sometimes that we look at the world around us, the problems seem so big, and we think, what can I do? I'm just one person, or I'm just a housewife, or I'm just an attorney, or whatever. But I have learned through my work in India that one person can, in fact, make a big difference, and I'd like to share some of those experiences with you today. For the last 4,000 years, leprosy has been a curse in India, destroying the lives of literally millions of people. When I first went to India about 5 years ago, I could hardly even bring myself to look at the leprosy beggars on the street. Their suffering just seemed almost palpable. They would come up to your car begging at every stoplight. I even had one man put up his hand to me. He had maggots crawling through his hand. It was just unbelievable. When I got home, I couldn't sleep because I was just so, these images, they haunted me at night. And so I finally decided I could just have insomnia forever, or I could do something about it. So I finally gathered 3 friends around my kitchen table, dragged in John's secretary, and together we formed a little charity called Rising Star Outreach that was sort of dedicated to serving the leprosy-affected of India. When we first started, we weren't really quite sure what to do, so we just began doing humanitarian work. We took this video. This is very amateur. I hope you all can see it. I hope it's clearer on your screen than it is on mine. But it just kind of shows how we first started working in the colonies. This is the leader of one of our colonies. He is completely blind. Most of our patients are either blind or going blind because of leprosy's effect on the eyes. You can see how thin they are. Their diets consist mostly of just rice and water when they can get rice. There's a lot of children in the colonies. They just kind of languish there. They should be going to school, but they're treated with such disrespect and contempt at school that they often just quit, and they just are used as beggars by their parents. When we went to the colonies, we would bring our pocket knives to actually dig out the wounds of the patients because they couldn't get any medical care. We did this in the dirt with no anesthesia. This is Saral. We were working on her foot. She kept trying to pull it away, so she asked her grandson to hold her foot because she knew she had to get this done. She had raised him since he was 13 days old when his parents died, and they were very bonded, and so he did this for her. If the wound reached the bone, then we had to tell the patient that their foot needed to come off, and this was the case with Saral. When we told her this, she was inconsolable because she knew that it meant that she couldn't get out to go begging and that she would probably starve to death. She was worried about who would care for her grandson when she was gone. We would bring a 75-kilo bag of rice to each colony each month, and every family would get 4 scoops of rice, and that had to last them until we came again the next month. They were always begging us for painkillers. They had a hard time holding them because they don't have any hands a lot of times. This man is also blind, although his wife, as you can see, doesn't have leprosy. It doesn't matter. She's still treated by others as if she's under the curse. This is Jennifer Kala. She's one of the babies in our colonies that actually contracted leprosy. We were fortunate enough to be able to treat her. We'll talk about her later on. This is Saroja. She is in another colony, the Moot colony. She is paralyzed on the right side of her face, doesn't have hands, only has one leg. This lady has actually died. A rat ate her side out during the night. And this happens a lot because they have no feeling. The rats will eat their limbs off at night. This was the lady who died, her husband. He didn't have any feet. They'd rotted off, and he was blind also. He has also died. His name is Mario. He's a very gentle man, was a dear friend. We certainly miss him. We really hungered to find a way to make their lives more meaningful. You know, it didn't take us long to figure out that if we fed them today, we had to come back and feed them tomorrow. We had just started doing this because we had no idea really how to start. So anyway, we finally met this lady. Her name is Padma Venkatraman. She is the daughter of the former president of India. Could we get on the picture, on the PowerPoint? Thanks. Her father, Ramashami Venkatraman, was president for 5 years. Padma had also been the permanent women's representative to the United Nations. And so she was an amazing woman. She could have chosen to live her life in luxury, enjoying her family's prestige and influence, but instead she decided she wanted to spend her life serving the most outcast and the lowest people in India. There's her father, President Venkatraman. And so that's how she spent her life. When we first partnered, it was interesting. You know, the leprosy affected in India have lived as beggars on the street for thousands of years, despised by almost all who see them. But Padma had a different idea. She had a vision of these people being able to live self-sufficiently with dignity. without begging, and even to be able to own their own businesses. So she started an interesting system of microlending in the colonies. When we first got together, we put together a program that would allow us to help eliminate leprosy, hopefully in this generation, and rehabilitate those who already had the disease. Our first initiative was economic rehabilitation through microlending. One of the fun things I got to do when we first partnered is I had to go with Padma to meet the colony she'd already been working in. When we got to one colony, about when they recognized Padma, I don't know, 400 or 500 people came rushing up to see us. They were all talking at once. But from the back of the crowd, a man came who he called out loudly, "Padma, I have a gift for you." And the crowd kind of parted, and here was this man standing with his hands behind his back. And he came up through the crowd, and then when he got to Padma, he pulled out from behind his back a little three-legged stool, and he handed it to Padma. Well, he had a big grin on his face, but there were tears coming down. Padma was a little weepy, the crowd was cheering, and I was clueless. I had no idea what was going on. So anyway, on the way home that day, I said to Padma, "What was all that in the colony with that three-legged stool?" And she said, "Oh, Becky, when I first came to this colony years ago, 5 years ago, I gathered everybody together in the dirt so we could talk about my ideas. And this man interrupted me, and he said, 'Did you bring us any rice?' And she said, told him no. He said, 'Well, what gifts did you bring us?' And she said, 'I didn't bring gifts.' And he said, 'Well, then I'm not interested.' And with that, he started walking away. As he walked away, the whole colony stood up and started walking away. And so Padma called out after him, and she said, 'Wait, if you'll just listen to me, I'll teach you some principles so that one day you could give me a gift.' He sat in the dirt and kept on. She was left with fire. This is a picture of a guy. If we can get to it. Huh? I'm thinking maybe we could get to a little better. Again, there he is. We were left with 5 women, and what she did was she organized these women into what she calls a women's self-help group. The way these help groups work is that the women all put in 10 rupees a month out of their begging money. That's about 25 American cents. Now, the average beggar in Chennai makes about $4 a month begging, and so this is a large amount of money to them. But they put it into this little bank that started. When they get enough to make the first loan, like maybe $5 for an iron or something, the first woman takes that loan and she'll start an ironing business. When she pays it back with 8% interest, then and the next woman takes the money and she starts a little business. Well, before long, these 5 women had more money than anyone in the colony, because our average micro business earns about 2,000 rupees a month, or about 80 American dollars. It's a huge difference. So then all the men want to join, you know? And we actually let them. But the cool thing is we've taught the women now that if a man comes for a loan, because these 5 women will always control the micro-lending in that colony, so when the men come for the loans, if a man is known to brutally beat his wife, no loans. They can't get a loan until the beatings stop. Or if a man comes for a loan who has been known to have raped several girls in the colony, which is also very common, again, there are no loans until the rapes have stopped. So really, for the first time in history, these women are able to take charge of their lives in ways that they've never done before. Padma told me that this man in this colony was one of the last to take a micro loan, but he took out a $5 loan to buy this tool, and he became a carpenter, and there he had met us a year later with the words, "Padma, I have a gift for you." And the joy that was on his face was so much more even than the money that he'd been able to earn. It was really neat. This is Gopal, one of our patients that started a little tea business with a $3 loan. He bought a pot and 2 cups. He has since expanded his business, and now we had a chance to ask him what a difference it had made in his life to have this business. We thought he would say, "Oh, like I get to eat every day now," or "Now my children get to go to school," but he didn't. He said, "You know, when I used to beg in the city in front of the shop owner would come out and curse at me, threaten me until I moved away. But now I supply tea to that shop. When I come now, the owner sets a seat and offers me tea. So, it's the dignity and the self-respect they get from being a productive member of society that's the biggest blessing of these little businesses. The other really neat thing about the microlending is that one gift of $20 can start a business for an entire family. Then when it's repaid and then relent again over and over time, that same $20 can end up starting 20 businesses for 20 different families. It's a very cool idea. One of the things that we do for businesses is agriculture projects. The people are now growing their own food, and so now instead of just rice and water, they have vegetables and fruits, and you can see how proud they are of what they produce. We also start a husbandry project in every colony, try to get a dairy in each colony that gives them milk with protein and calcium. This lady, Saral, is actually the one that you saw her having her foot dug out. As it turned out, we weren't able to get back to her to get her to the hospital for the amputation, and by the time we did get back, her foot was starting to heal. So she ended up not losing her foot. She took out a loan to buy this cow. It had a baby, and she's named the baby Becky Douglas. So there I am in India. It was actually a male cow, a male calf. But this is the first milk that colony produced. So proud, could hardly wait to show us. We dig out catfish ponds where they can raise catfish. Again, you can see the pride on their faces to be able to produce their own food. We have goat raising projects, and we even raise pigs. We raise turkeys, all kinds of things. Then they sometimes they'll say, well, I would rather have a different business, and so we try to find things that they can do. These women wanted to do a stitching business, and we got them little foot pedal machines that they could use with their stumps. This man wanted to be an artist. We have now started an art school so that they can get healing through their art, and the school's now actually shown all over the world, its paintings. This man wanted to start a transport company. It's interesting when they're beggars, begging reduces you to your very lowest self, because the worse you look, the more money you make begging on the streets. And so they don't wash or take care of themselves. And in fact, we even had one woman come up to us once when our clinic was working, and she had these awful looking hands, and we said, oh my goodness, we need to fix those hands. She said, no, I put them in the fire every day. I get more money begging. So the interesting thing that we see happening now is that the opposite is happening. As they start earning their own money, they want to look good. And so one of our micro businesses is a barber shop, and we just started a beauty shop in one of our colonies for leprosy-affected patients. It's very cool. This man started a snack shop. This man is the carpenter. You can see the beautiful things that he makes. He now hires between 12 to 20 other carpenters depending on his orders. He gets orders from all over because his prices are so good. He's amazingly gifted. He's trained these people, and some of them even come from outside the colony that work for him. So it's caused an integration of the untouchables with regular society that never would have happened otherwise. It's pretty amazing. Our second initiative is to provide medical care and screening so that we can stop the disease before it starts. This little girl's name's Jennifer Kalash. She's the baby that you saw in the video. She has dry leprosy here. You can see where she's lost the pigment in her skin. At this point, leprosy doesn't hurt, it doesn't itch. Most people don't even know they have leprosy. In Jennifer's case, it took one packet of a multi-drug therapy put out by the World Health Organization to cure her. The pack cost $1.50. This is Sumangala. She didn't get the packet. She wasn't discovered in time. Her leprosy progressed to wet leprosy. At this point, it becomes very difficult to cure. Normally, she'll be on medication, daily medication, for up to 2 years, and by the time she's cured, she will most likely have lost some fingers and some toes and will be marked forever as leprosy affected in India. And so that's one of the things that our clinic does. We screen every kid in the colony every time we go, because leprosy has a genetic component. If you have the marker in your blood, you're more likely to get it. And so the children in the colony are the most likely children to contract the disease. This is our mobile medical clinic with our doctor and nurse and driver. We treated 6,000 patients last year. We treat them in the dirt, as we said, without anesthesia. Leprosy leaves you without your limbs, and so without feeling, it's very easy to injure yourself. Living in those filthy colonies, the injuries quickly become infected. Actually, in this picture, if you look closely, you can even see the fly in there already laying its eggs. And so anyway, they get gangrene, and then they get maggots. We end up having to amputate. But so one of the things we do is just try to keep their wounds cleaned out. This particular man I watched our doctor one night take over 500 maggots out of this man's foot. He had come to us from Bangalore, which is over 10 hours away. He couldn't find anyone there to treat him, but they said if you can just get to Chennai, there's an organization there that will help you. So he came on the overnight train, and we were able to treat him. He spoke English, and as I left that night, he gave me the Hindu salute, and he said, "I thank you in the name of my gods, my wife, and my children. You have saved my life." And I remember going home that night thinking, dang, I love my job. I love what I do. In India, leprosy is not a disease. It's considered a curse of God. And the leprosy patients are all considered defiling and defiled. Anything they touch is defiled. They're the most untouchable of all the untouchables. So one of the gifts that we give them, the most healing things we do, is simply to touch them. It's cheap, it's free, and it makes, they tell us that makes a bigger difference than anything else we do. Our third initiative is that we create children's homes and schools. We take the children actually out of the colonies. Otherwise, they are likely to become the next generation of leprous beggars on the street. Instead, we're trying to train them so that they can become productive citizens of India. This is a picture of one of the girls in our colonies eating trash. They have such a hard life in the colonies, but we bring them out, clean them up, teach them proper hygiene, and they just become darling. This is our cute kids. One of the hard things about being in India is that we're constantly having people come to us to bring us more kids. We have a waiting list now of over 300 children. We have at the moment 140, but we're building homes and schools for 800. So we're expanding as fast as we can. This is a day in the life of our kids. They have showers in the morning, something they would never get in the colonies. Then they have milk. Then they dress for school. We do a million heads of hair every day, it seems. They put this white powder all over their faces because they think it makes them beautiful. In India, the lighter your skin, the higher your caste. And so they cover themselves with powder. Then they have a little assembly before school. And this is our school. Is this cute or what? We sometimes meet outdoors, sometimes indoors. We're teaching them in English because English is a language of business in India. We expect our children to become doctors and lawyers and architects and outsourcers. They have a lot of computer training that we're doing as well with the children because India is such a huge outsourcing center. Then they have lunch. This is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Then after lunch, they have a nap. They sleep on the floor, the same at night. Once a month, they have a field trip. Here they are at an alligator park. Then they have chores. This little boy, we took this picture, watched him clean out the toilet with that brush and then wash the rest of the floor with it. So we have a little fine-tuning to do, a little training yet. They have free time in the afternoon. This is something you would never see in the colony because they don't read or write there. This little Satya. They love to write their sponsoring families in America. Families send in $30 a month to sponsor the kids, and they love to email them back and forth. The kids, we give them vaccinations. They do yoga before dinner. We obviously have a little work to do with the relaxation technique, but they're getting there. Once a month, the parents come and they spend the day with their children. We're trying to keep those family bonds strong. And they really just hold the kids in their lap the whole day because they miss them so much. It's very sweet. This is the children's homes. We own 14 acres of land, and these are the 2 homes that are on that property. We are helped in our work by hundreds of volunteers that come every year to India at their own expense. They work from sunup to sundown. Some are doctors, some are nurses, some teachers. Some are just people that want to love and nurture children. Because of their efforts, we're able to keep our costs down. All of our operating costs are paid out of pocket by our board of directors, and it allows us to send all of our money to India. In closing, I'd just like to quickly tell you a story that happened to my son Alex when he was a volunteer in India. we brought this little 2-year-old girl in off the streets. Her name was Ronnie. She was almost dead. She was so emaciated. Her body would not even accept rice. We had to just feed her rice water. Also, she would put her hands up in front of her face if you'd ever tried to come close to her because she'd been so abused on the streets. But for some reason, she took a liking to Alex. And every time Alex came to the home, she would toddle over and sit in his lap. And he would just hold her all day and just hug her or stroke her hair or sing to her. Every email home was, oh, today Ronnie smiled, today Ronnie laughed, whatever. It was Ronnie, Ronnie, Ronnie. Well, after Alex had been home for a couple of months, I got a call from our director there, and he said, "Hey, our hearts are in India today. What is the problem?" He said, "Well, apparently Ronnie has a mother. A woman came to the home and said she was Ronnie's mother, said she'd made a promise to her Hindu gods to find her daughter and care for her, and she took her out of the home." He said, "You know, she'll die on the streets in the dark, that woman. You just had to see her when she first came to Rising Star." Alex, as it turned out, was doing homework at the table next to me. He overheard enough of the conversation to know it was about Ronnie. When I hung up, he said, "Mom, what is it? What is it about Ronnie?" So I explained it to him, and he said, "You can get her back. You can't let her stay." And I said, "Alex, there are laws. I can't take a child from a mother who wants." He said, "Mom, she'll die on the streets." I said, "Alex, my hands are tied." He started to cry. He said, "Great, I guess I just wasted my summer in India last year. All I did was care for Ronnie." He said, "For all the good I did, I guess I could have stayed in America and worked at Burger King." I wanted to be able to tell him he had not wasted his time, that in fact what he had done was valuable, and so I kind of sent a little prayer up for help. A story came into my mind about a woman named Anne Blakely that I had read several years ago. Anne was a great fan of Mother Teresa. She saved up her money and actually went to India to see Mother Teresa. But when she got to Calicut, to the home for the dying, Mother Teresa wasn't there. She said, "Where is she?" They explained to her that she was over at the infant. So she got directions and infant home. Sure enough, Mother Teresa was there, coming through the home towards the door. As she came, she would stop though, and she would say, "This baby right here," or "This baby right there." There were 200 babies on the floor, just half a dozen workers. But when Mother Teresa pointed one out, one of those workers would pick up that baby and go sit against the wall. There were half a dozen rocking chairs, and they would rock the baby. When Mother Teresa got to the doorway, Mother Teresa herself bent down and picked up a baby and handed it to Anne, and she said, "This baby is for you." And Anne just went, "Well, thank you." Whoa. But by the time she looked up, Mother Teresa was gone. She didn't know what to do. The woman against the wall motioned for her to come over against the wall, so she did. She was motioned to sit down in a rocking chair. One lady said, "You need to rock this baby. You know, Mother Teresa has a belief that no child should ever leave this earth without having felt human love and experienced human touch. She has a gift. She's able to come to our home every day. She can tell which babies will die today. There's obviously more babies than we could ever pick up ourselves and hold. So she tells us, and we rock these babies till they die. So you need to rock this baby until he dies." So Anne said, "I rock the baby. I hum the Brahms love." She said, "I will never forget who this child was, how he pressed his face into my neck in response to my touch." She said, "Sure enough, that child fell in my arms that afternoon." She said, "I have friends that would tell me I was dead because the child died anyway. But," she said, "I would tell you that that was the holiest day of my life. I learned that day that no act of love is ever wasted." That's what I told Alex. Alex, no act of love is ever wasted. Ronnie spent months in our home, loved and cherished. It may be the only thing she takes from this life with her. We're not always successful with every child. We're not always successful with every patient. But I believe that the work that we do has great value. If any of you are interested in learning more about our work, you can find us at risingstaroutreach.org on the net. If you'd like a copy of the documentary to find out more about what we do, we'd love to send you a copy. Thanks for this opportunity. It's been a delight to share this with you. And John, you have, what, 3 minutes left?
About 2, I think.
Go for it, baby.
Thank you. It's really an honor for me to be with you this afternoon. I have to figure out how to get in the middle of this frame here. Okay, I'll do my best. It really is an honor to be with you and an honor to be on the same program as my wife. It's easy to see how her work promotes justice and fairness, changing the lives of thousands of people through acts of service, treating the poor with compassion and respect. It's particularly stunning to me, since she's done this halfway around the world, in a society where the government is not the least bit hospitable and where years of prejudice and discrimination frustrate almost every step she tries to take. It really is a miracle to me, and I'm in awe of what she and others have done. It's also a pleasure to speak following my wife, because there are very few moments in my marriage when I get the last word. So this is actually quite pleasant for me. It also seems to be an appropriate time to address the subject. Within the past months, we've seen Buddhist monks protesting in Myanmar, lawyers taking to the streets in Pakistan, university students marching in Caracas, Venezuela, rioting in Kenya, and in each instance, people are trying to seek the establishment of a just and civil and fair society, each seeking a society where the laws apply equally to the rich and to the poor, and to the powerful and to the weak. It's a very elusive parts of the world. We also see places in the world where the goals aren't quite so noble, and if you looked at the Sudan, it would be hard to see what's right and what's wrong, or maybe right and wrong have lost all meaning in those contexts. I'm going to speak for a few moments this afternoon about attempting to establish justice and fairness. I had a managing partner once that spoke about practicing law as being God's work. And many thought he was being cynical or facetious, thinking about what could possibly be godly about billing more hours, working day and night, striving for the next big case or big deal or big fee. I, on the other hand, thought he was absolutely right, although perhaps not for the reasons he would have articulated. I think we need to recognize that justice, equity, and fairness are in fact God's way. And because they're so often missing, establishing justice, equity, and fairness really is God's work. We're painfully aware that from time to time the power of that work gets lost in the press of what we have to do every day, particularly when we focus upon the financial or business aspects of practicing law. However, we must always remember the importance of the principles behind what we do, assuring fairness, assuring that laws are followed, assuring that rules are being enforced, and the principles that govern our society are applied equally and fairly throughout. And it seems to me that this really is God's work. I spend most of my days representing some of the world's most largest and most complex financial institutions, helping them try to understand the rules that govern their conduct, trying to help them achieve their business objectives in a very complicated regulatory framework. And I enjoy it. It's interesting, it's challenging, it's fun. For that work, I get to charge an outrageous amount of money. One of my boys helped a friend with his yard work the other day and came in proudly and announced that he'd made $10. He then asked me how long it took me to work before somebody paid me $10. I told him about 48 seconds. That was something that deflated him a bit and continues to astound me. But what I do is a little abstract. It's not as immediate as getting someone out of jail, helping with an adoption, helping a poor family about to be evicted. These are immediate personal problems of tremendous importance to the individual. It reminds me that a wife got in an automobile accident. A truck clipped the side of her car and sped off. She called me on the phone and asked me what to do, and like a good lawyer, said call the police and call our insurance agent. That didn't seem practical or immediate enough for her, and when a witness came in and announced not only did he have the tag number for the truck, his neighbor and best friend was a lawyer, she immediately asked for his card. It explains her response when people ask what kind of law I practice, and she says the kind that doesn't do anybody good. However, I think the most important work I do has nothing to do with banks or billable hours. For the last 10 years, I've wandered around the world, spending about 4 weeks a year working with central banks, ministries, banks, and bankers, trying to help countries establish functioning financial systems. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of those experiences, but first I'd like to talk about why that work is so important. We live incredible luxury in the United States. We enjoy one of the highest standards of living in the world. One of the drivers of that prosperity is our financial system, the ability for us to turn our hard-earned money over to a bank with full confidence that it be there when we want it. Banks, in turn, have the ability to lend that money out to businesses and individuals, permitting them to start businesses, buy equipment, lease space, hire employees, take risks, and hopefully earn the rewards associated with their ideas, their time, and their talents, and their energies. And while banks don't have quite the same confidence that that money will be repaid, they do have confidence in a legal system to enforce the contracts and protect their rights. It's marvelous. It is in many ways miraculous. And it isn't just banks. It's insurance companies, pension funds, asset managers, securities firms, all distributing funds throughout our economy. And even more important in a society where trust, trillions of dollars change hands each day in our financial system, with the barest of contracts and agreements, all resting on a system of trust and confidence based upon years of practice and experience. There is an inherent confidence that underpins our financial system. That trust and that confidence has unleashed an incredible wave of prosperity, and our financial system is the framework that allows that to happen. To give you an idea, let me focus just on a few numbers. The gross domestic product of the United States is roughly a little bit over $13 trillion. It's about 3 times the size of the second largest economy, 5 times that of China, 10 times that of Canada, 13 times that of Russia. We have $11 trillion of housing debt outstanding, $9 trillion of U.S. government debt, $2 trillion of consumer debt, $6 trillion of business debt, $4 trillion of debt by state and local governments, and an additional $4 trillion of borrowing by our financial sectors. That's $45 trillion supported by 300 million people. $45 trillion because people believe in our system of laws and our court system and in our society of trust and confidence. $45 trillion of trust that money will be returned. $45 trillion supporting the most vibrant economy in the world. It is miraculous, and that, of course, is just the debt. It doesn't count the trillions of dollars in mutual funds invested in real estate, locked up in pensions or otherwise invested, or staggering amounts in private businesses. It all rests upon trust and confidence in our society of laws, rules, and justice. That trust and confidence doesn't exist in parts of the world. Billions of people live in a system where they cannot trust their money to others, where every transaction must be settled by cash or barter, where laws are routinely ignored and rights are really just the merest of suggestion. These people are stuck in a ending cycle of poverty, despair, and dismay, where the only law that matters is the law of who has the most power, and where there is no recourse for any offense, regardless of its nature. Even those with homes and businesses and jobs are trapped because there's no way for them to turn those assets into economic power. There's no title to the home, no certificate of incorporation for the business, no paperwork or documentation for the wage. So there's no way to get a mortgage, much less a home equity loan, and much less a business loan secured by that home. There's no way to sell shares or interests in the company because that company doesn't legally exist. There's no way to get a loan based on your income, for there's no documentation of that income stream. The lack of rules and of rights and of a system of fairness and justice and equity will doom these people to a life of poverty and misery. If there was a way to unleash that power, what a difference it would make in their lives. What could I save for? What could I borrow to start a business? And more fundamentally, what if I had a stake in my economy and in my society and in my country? What if it mattered to me what my government did or didn't do? In 1991, President George H.W. Bush called upon Cyrus Vance, the former Secretary of State, and John Whitehead, then the president of Goldman Sachs, and asked them to form an organization that would take the talents of the American financial system to the former Soviet republics in Eastern Europe to help them build systems. These countries were moving decades of a centralized planning, government-controlled economy and desperately needed assistance. The concept was to use volunteers from the major Wall Street law firms, investment banks, accounting firms, regulatory bodies, and consulting firms, and provide these countries with the best and brightest and most sophisticated practical advice from people in the peak of their career to help them meet the needs of their citizens in a way that mere financial aid would not do. The basic theory, and the one that we subscribe to over 15 years later, is that sound financial markets will make more of a difference in the lives of the people than anything else we might do. It gives them a stake in the society. It permits them to allocate resources to meet their needs. It provides freedom and opportunity. It unleashes energy. It creates dynamism. More importantly, vests them and us in building a freer and better country. I've been working with this organization since 1987, and I want to share some of my experiences, for I think they illustrate the principles I've discussed. I spent several weeks in Russia, currency crash in 1998. At the request of the central bank, we visited 3 very large and very insolvent banks trying to ascertain what might be done. One of the banks was preparing to engage in what it described as a transfer, and it was going to take all of its productive assets and transfer them to a new shell bank, leaving behind all of the creditors. It had made so-called arrangements with government officials to effect this transaction. It was preparing to go to its foreign creditors and offer them about 3 cents on the dollar to write down their debts, which would then be assumed by the new institution, or if they didn't like that, it would be left behind in the old institution, where they could wait in line patiently for years, eventually getting nothing from the bankrupt bank. When I asked the president about whether his plan was just or fair, he just laughed. When I asked about his foreign creditors, he shrugged and said, "What choice do they have?" When I asked him about foreign banks and foreign bank participation in the market, he laughed again and said that the difference between us and the foreign banks is that they think they have to play by the rules, and we know that we don't. So who wins in a situation like that? He does, maybe in the short run. But who invests with them next time? Who trusts their money to? Who has the expectation of fairness and justice in a system like that? After the currency crisis spread to Indonesia, I spent several weeks helping the government try to address the problem of the insolvent banks in Indonesia. The problem was extreme in its scope. The net insolvency guaranteed by the government represented about 65% of the Indonesian gross domestic product. One of the prime causes of this crisis was the rampant corruption that permeated every aspect of society. Loans were made based on connections and bribery and relationships. Judges were bought and sold, and every government required some sort of bribe. Nothing was as it seemed. Society, this corruption permeated society from top to bottom. Who wins? Maybe the government official wins in the short run when he puts a little money in his pocket. But what happens in the long run? What businesses can't get started? What productive loans can't? What investments are foregone? What jobs are not created? All because a government clerk abuses his or her position. Who has an expectation of fairness and justice? It explains the experience I had at the presidential palace after a meeting in Jakarta in 2000. After spending about an hour with the president regarding various approaches for dealing with the crisis and trying to convince him of the advantages of transparency and integrity, we were traveling to the airport past a bank that had been closed by the government. Now, the bank was insolvent, but it wasn't quite so insolvent that it couldn't have paid the depositors at least some of their money. But the bank had been closed for weeks without making any payments. The depositors were rioting in the streets, throwing bricks and stones, chanting and shouting. We got to watch that riot from a very close and very uncomfortable vantage point. It was not particularly pleasant. The people in the streets certainly had an expectation of fairness and justice, and their frustrations were expressed with shouts and bricks, not confidence in society that would protect their interests. Back to Russia. We spent years working with a tireless reformer in the central bank, helping him establish a system of deposit insurance for the citizens of Russia, implementing a plan of supervision and examination over the banks, and trying to institute a program to stop corruption and money laundering that were rampant in the system. 2 years ago, on his way from a soccer match, his car was stopped, and he and his driver were murdered by thugs hired by a bank that found his reforms a little inconvenient. Who wins and who loses in a situation like that? I just got back from Malawi in sub-Saharan Africa. Malawi is a country about the size of Pennsylvania with 13 million people, 11 million of whom live on less than $2 a day. The life expectancy is 42. It has a terrible problem with AIDS, with malaria, with sanitation and childhood nutrition. There are 11 banks in the country, the largest of which has $300 million of assets, about the size of a reasonable community bank in suburban Atlanta. The fourth and fifth largest banks are insolvent, and at some point fairly soon those banks will close, and the depositors who've entrusted their money to that bank won't get it. There's simply no protection for them. The banks, such as they are, reach less than 10% of the population, meaning that 90% of the people must rely on cash or barter to affect any economic transaction. These are all huge, intractable, difficult problems. Every Sunday I teach a class of 17-year-olds. I got back from a lab who spent a class talking about what might be done. These are bright kids. They were full of ideas of things that we might do: sanitation projects, electric power projects, treated mosquito nets, vaccinations, emphasis on education, increased foreign aid, targeted development projects, all significant and useful and all important. And yet I suggested to them that the thing that we could do for the people of Malawi would be the best thing we could do, the most important thing we could do would be to establish a society where honesty prevails, where fairness permeates relationships, where contracts are honored, and justice is meted out equally among all. What a difference would it make? Well, for a start, people could make agreements to provide goods and services for payment in the future, confident that those agreements would be honored. They could place the funds they earn in a bank, assured that when necessary it would be returned in full. The banks, in turn, could loan that money to productive businesses, confident it would be paid on time, in full, with the agreed upon interest. Property could be bought, sold, borrowed against, all with the confidence that transactions would be respected. And that's just the beginning. People could have a stake in society, envision a future for themselves and their children, and invest in those futures, confident that those investments would bear fruit. It would unleash creativity and energy that is now devoted just to survival, and would allow them to build something of meaning for themselves and their children for a long time to come. They could take concern and care regarding their own personal conduct, for they would have to worry about the impact of their own personal actions on what they've built, and it would transform Malawi at every level. At times, I think we have little understanding or appreciation of the unique society in which we live. It's not perfect by any means, for societies by their definition are comprised of people. Most of those people may be honest and well-meaning, but none of us are perfect, and we cannot expect human institutions to be perfect. But what we can expect is actually fairly marvelous. We can expect our agreements and contracts to be honored. We expect that when I fulfill my part of the agreement, you'll fulfill yours. When I give money to a bank, I expect to get it back, and when I borrow money from a bank, the expectation is I'll pay it. We expect that if someone acts negligently or recklessly and we're injured, we'll be protected and compensated. We expect that when someone breaks the law, they'll be punished. We expect a judge to be honest. We expect the law to apply equally to all. And we expect that when I go to a court, the judge will apply the law fairly and impartially, and the results will reflect an application of the law to the facts. Is it naive? Yeah, a little bit. And does it reflect the real world? Not every time, but enough times that we expect it to happen, and we're disappointed when it doesn't. And there's more. We expect that we can disagree with our president, and we can express that disagreement. We expect that in November of this year, we'll cast a vote for a new president, and that in January, President Bush will step down and a new president will take office without any furor whatsoever. We expect we could rally in Washington in favor of the war, against the war, in favor of abortion, against abortion, in favor of amnesty for immigrants, against immigration, illegal immigration, all without worrying that we'll be beaten, imprisoned, or shot for our views. We can expect that or Muslim or Jewish or Christian or atheist or agnostic without repercussion. We expect to open the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and read editorials criticizing our president or our Senate or the rich or the powerful. We can expect to log onto the internet, read Al Jazeera, or hear what Osama bin Laden might be saying, or read editorials in the Gulf Times, all without censorship and all without worrying what they're saying. It's not that way that Indeed, it was not always that way anywhere. We need only to read in the papers about the consequences of failing to abide by the rules of a civil and just society where the rule of law doesn't prevail. We see poverty and despair. We see the wealthy and the rich abandoning their own countries to invest what they've stolen in societies that play by the rules. We see corruption and self-dealing and greed, all without fear of consequences. So when I go to Russia or Indonesia, Egypt or Ecuador or Malawi to work with governments, what I'm really trying to do is establish a framework and rules, and more importantly, culture. It's couched in terms of capital ratios and deposit insurance and bank supervision and enforcement and payment systems. But what it's really meant to be is the establishment of the rule of law in countries. Establish in the core financial system of the country with rules and principles designed for fairness, justice, and equity, with the firm belief that it will spread from there and transform the lives of millions. And that really does strike me as God's work. Now, I don't know what you graduate. Whatever happens to you, will have received some education and will have learned to approach problems in a critical fashion with a unique perspective. You'll have talents and skills that few possess, and you'll have opportunities to serve that very few are afforded. You have the power to make the difference in the lives of others. That life can be the life of the homeless mother, the unjustly accused, the battered spouse, of the neglected child. But you'll have the opportunity to do God's work as well. And I pray that you don't let the opportunity pass you by. Thank you. So I hope we're done. They're looking at you.
Andy, are you there? Is Andy going to wrap this up?
I don't know. We may just be done.
Okay, I think we're done.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. Thank you, John and Becky.